The faint hum of a neon sign outside flickered through the cracks in Liam Drake's blinds, casting jagged streaks of light across his cluttered desk. Papers sprawled everywhere. Articles, photographs, maps, all meticulously pinned together with red string forming an intricate web of corruption. His laptop screen glowed coldly, illuminating the sharp angles of his face as he leaned forward, scrolling through grainy security footage from yet another assassination tied to Victor Kane's pharmaceutical empire. Liam ran a hand over his stubbled jaw, exhaustion etched into every line on his face. He had spent years chasing stories like this one, exposing the underbelly of power-hungry elites who thought themselves untouchable. But something about these murders felt different. They were too clean, too calculated. And now, 3 victims later, he was no closer to unraveling the truth than when he'd started. He sighed and reached for his coffee mug, only to find it empty. The clock ticked past midnight. Another sleepless night. Another dead end. But then, out of the corner of his eye, movement caught his attention. A news alert flashing at the bottom of his screen. A new body had been found near an abandoned warehouse downtown. Same MO as the others. No witnesses, no evidence. Just another life erased without explanation. Without hesitation, Liam grabbed his coat and keys. This was his chance, or maybe his last shot, to break the case wide open. The streets were eerily quiet as Liam parked his car several blocks away from the scene. Police tape fluttered in the wind, marking off a perimeter around the shadowy lot where officers milled about, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. He lingered at the edge of the crowd, watching, listening. Reporters shouted questions into microphones, but none of them seemed to know anything useful. Just speculation. Always speculation. And then she appeared. She stumbled out of the shadows, her chestnut hair tangled and wild, her pale face streaked with dirt. Her green eyes darted frantically, searching for something or someone, but finding nothing. In her trembling hands, she clutched a small object wrapped tightly in her fingers. Blood stained its edges. Liam froze, his instincts screaming that this woman didn't belong here. Not as a bystander, not as a victim. She looked like a ghost. "Hey," he called softly, stepping toward her. "Are you okay?" She flinched at the sound of his voice, backing away instinctively. Don't come near me," she stammered, clutching whatever she held even tighter against her chest. "It's all right," Liam said, raising his palms in surrender. "I'm not going to hurt you." Her breathing hitched, uneven and panicked. Tears welled up in her wide eyes, spilling silently down her cheeks. She shook her head, muttering under her breath, though whether it was to him or herself, Liam couldn't tell. "What's your name?" he asked gently, taking another cautious step closer. I don't," her voice cracked, trailing off as confusion clouded her expression. "I don't remember." Liam frowned, his reporter's mind already racing with possibilities. Amnesia? Or was she hiding something? Before he could press further, she suddenly thrust the object toward him, her hand shaking so badly she nearly dropped it. It was a USB drive, smeared with dried blood. "Take it," she whispered urgently. "Please. They'll kill me if they find it." Liam hesitated, studying her carefully. Whoever they were, fear radiated off her in waves. If this little piece of plastic was worth killing for, it could be the key to everything he'd been chasing. "All right," he said finally, slipping the USB into his pocket. "Come with me. You're not safe here." For a moment, she hesitated, torn between trust and terror. Then, with a shaky nod, she followed him back to his car. They drove in silence, the tension thick enough to choke on. Sophie, that was the name she eventually gave him, sat rigid in the passenger seat, staring blankly out the window. Every few minutes, her fingers would twitch, gripping the hem of her sweater as if trying to hold herself together. Liam glanced at her occasionally, debating how much to push. Finally, he broke the silence. "You said they will kill you," he began, keeping his tone neutral. Who are you talking about? Sophie turned to look at him, her green eyes hollow. I don't know, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. I can't remember anything. Just running. Hiding. And she trailed off, pressing a hand to her temple as if fighting off a headache. Flashes. Voices. Gunshots. Liam tightened his grip on the steering wheel. Whatever mess she was caught up in, it was bigger than either of them realized. And now, thanks to that USB drive burning a hole in his pocket, he was neck-deep in it too. By the time they arrived at his apartment, Sophie looked ready to collapse. Liam ushered her inside, flicking on the lights to reveal bare walls and stacks of research materials piled haphazardly around the room. He gestured for her to sit on the couch while he rummaged through a drawer for a first aid kit. Let me see your hands, he said, kneeling in front of her. She hesitated before extending them, revealing cuts and scrapes crusted with dried blood. As Liam cleaned her wounds, Sophie spoke haltingly, piecing together fragments of her memory. I think I worked somewhere important, she murmured. Somewhere dangerous. But I don't know why I left or what I took. Liam paused, meeting her gaze. Whatever's on this drive, he said, tapping the pocket where it rested, it's worth protecting. Which means we need to figure out exactly what you've gotten yourself into, and fast. Sophie nodded weakly, but doubt lingered in her eyes. She didn't trust him, not completely. And honestly, he wasn't sure he trusted her either. But they were stuck together now, bound by secrets neither fully understood. Just as Liam stood to retrieve his laptop and begin analyzing the USB, headlights swept across the living room windows. A black SUV sped past, slowing briefly before disappearing into the night. Its occupants sat motionless, their faces obscured behind tinted glass. Liam's blood ran cold. Whoever they were, they'd found them, and they weren't giving up. As the SUV vanishes into the distance, Sophie grips the armrest, her knuckles white. They're still out there, she whispers, her voice trembling. We're not safe. The safe house was a stark contrast to Liam's cluttered apartment, a sparsely furnished studio perched above an unassuming cafe. The hum of distant traffic filtered through the cracked window, blending with the rhythmic ticking of a clock that hung crookedly on the wall. Sophie sat hunched on the edge of a worn couch, her arms wrapped tightly around herself as if trying to hold the pieces of her fractured mind together. Liam paced the room, his laptop open on the kitchen counter. His fingers flew across the keyboard as he attempted to decrypt the blood-stained USB drive. Each failed attempt only deepened the furrow in his brow. Time was slipping away, and every second they remained idle felt like an invitation for disaster. Sophie watched him from the corner of her eye, guilt gnawing at her insides. She wanted to help, needed to, but how could she contribute when she couldn't even remember who she was? Her gaze dropped to her hands, still raw from earlier wounds. What had she done to deserve this? And why did it feel like the answers were just out of reach, taunting her? You said you used to work somewhere important, Liam said suddenly, breaking the silence. He didn't look up from the screen, but his tone was sharp, probing. Do you remember anything else? Sophie flinched at the question, her chest tightening. I told you already, I don't know, she snapped, frustration bubbling over. All I can think about is kids. A little girl. She used to laugh so much. Her voice softened, tinged with nostalgia she didn't understand. But then there's yelling, screaming. Something bad happened. Liam paused, glancing at her briefly before returning to the laptop. A nanny, then? He asked, more to himself than to her. Who were you working for? I don't know, Sophie cried, standing abruptly. Tears welled in her eyes as she began pacing the small space. Why does it matter? You're treating me like some kind of criminal. And you're acting like someone with something to hide. Liam shot back, his patience wearing thin. Look, I'm not doing this because I want to. If we don't figure out what's on this drive, people are going to die, including you. His words hit like a punch to the gut, leaving Sophie breathless. She sank back onto the couch, burying her face in her hands. For all she knew, he was right. But how could she explain something she couldn't even grasp herself? Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Time blurred in the dim light of the safe house. Sophie drifted in and out of uneasy thoughts, snippets of memories surfacing like shards of glass, piercing her consciousness. Then, without warning, the world shifted. She was no longer sitting on the couch. She stood in a luxurious office, sunlight streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows. The air smelled faintly of leather and expensive cologne. Across the room, a man slammed his fist onto a polished mahogany desk. His face was familiar, though Sophie couldn't place why. "You underestimated me," the man growled, his voice dripping with menace. It was Victor Kane. Even now, years later, his presence radiated power and danger. On the other side of the desk stood a woman, visibly shaken but defiant. "You'll regret this," she spat, clutching a folder close to her chest. "When the truth comes out." Victor cut her off with a chilling laugh. "There won't be any truth. Not if I have anything to say about it." The scene dissolved as quickly as it had come, leaving Sophie gasping for air. She clutched the armrest of the couch, her heart pounding like a drum. Fragments of the vision swirled in her mind. The office, the argument, Victor's cold eyes boring into hers. "Liam!" she whispered hoarsely, her voice barely audible. He turned toward her, concern flickering across his face. "What is it?" "I saw him," she said, trembling. "Victor Kane. He was arguing with someone. I don't know who, but—" she hesitated, struggling to find the words. It felt personal. Liam straightened, his expression hardening. "Personal how?" "I don't know," Sophie exclaimed, frustration boiling over again. "But I was there. I must have been. Why else would I remember?" The revelation sent a jolt of adrenaline through Liam. If Sophie had been present during one of Victor's schemes, it meant she wasn't just collateral damage. She was involved. Whether willingly or not remained to be seen, but either way it made her a target, and it made him responsible for keeping her alive. As Sophie recounted the fragmented memory, Liam noticed subtle changes in her demeanor. The fear hadn't disappeared, but determination had begun to creep in, replacing the uncertainty that had defined her since they met. He recognized the shift. It was the same spark he'd seen in whistleblowers and activists willing to risk everything for justice. Still, trust was a luxury he couldn't afford. Night fell, casting long shadows across the room. Exhaustion weighed heavily on both of them, but sleep was impossible. They sat in tense silence, each lost in their own thoughts, until a faint creak outside shattered the quiet. Liam froze, his instincts screaming danger. Rising slowly, he moved to the window and peered through the blinds. Below, figures dressed in black emerged from the shadows, their faces obscured by masks. One carried a crowbar, another held what looked like a silenced pistol. "They're here," Liam muttered under his breath, turning to Sophie. "Grab whatever you can carry. We need to move. Now." Panic surged through Sophie as reality crashed down around her. This wasn't just paranoia, it was real. Men with weapons were coming for her. Again. Before she could respond, the sound of splintering would echoed through the building. The front door burst open, and masked men flooded into the hallway, their boots pounding against the floorboards. "Go," Liam shouted, grabbing her arm and pulling her toward the fire escape, heart racing. Sophie stumbled after him, the weight of her forgotten past pressing down on her shoulders. As they climbed down the rickety ladder, gunshots rang out behind them, shattering the night. Halfway down the fire escape, Sophie slipped, her fingers scraping desperately against the metal rungs. Below, headlights illuminated the alleyway, revealing another group of masked men waiting to intercept them. Trapped between two threats, Sophie turned to Liam, her voice shaking. "What do we do now?" The new hideout was tucked away in a quiet residential neighborhood, far removed from the chaos of the city. It was a modest duplex with peeling paint and overgrown hedges, shielding it from prying eyes. To Sophie, it felt like a fragile cocoon, temporary safety wrapped in layers of uncertainty. She sat by the window, staring out at the empty street below, her mind racing with fragments of memories that refused to align into anything coherent. Liam paced the room, his phone pressed to his ear as he muttered under his breath. He'd been on edge ever since their narrow escape from the safe house, constantly scanning for threats. Every creak of the floorboards or distant car engine made him flinch. But tonight there was something else troubling him, a nagging suspicion that had taken root during their flight. "We can't stay here long," Liam said abruptly, ending the call and slipping the phone into his pocket. His gray eyes flicked toward Sophie, who sat motionless, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "We need to keep moving." Sophie nodded absently, though her gaze remained fixed on the street outside. The thought of running again filled her with dread, but staying put felt equally dangerous. She hated feeling useless, trapped in a body that couldn't remember its own history while others decided her fate. It wasn't until the next morning that their fragile peace was disrupted. A soft knock at the door startled both of them. Liam moved cautiously, peering through the peephole before unlocking the deadbolt. On the other side stood a man in his late 30s, tall and broad-shouldered, with rugged features softened by an easy smile. He held a basket of fruit in one hand and extended the other in greeting. "Hi there," he said warmly. "I'm Marcus Hale. I live next door. Thought I'd introduce myself, since you're new around here." Liam hesitated, his grip tightening on the doorframe. "Thanks," he replied curtly, stepping back just enough to block Marcus's view of the interior. "We're keeping a low profile, though." Marcus chuckled, unfazed by Liam's cold demeanor. "Understood. Just wanted to make sure you folks were settling in all right. If you need anything, groceries, directions, whatever, don't hesitate to ask." Sophie appeared behind Liam, curiosity getting the better of her. Something about Marcus's friendly demeanor seemed almost comforting. For the first time in days, she felt a glimmer of normalcy. "Thank you," she said softly, managing a small smile. "That's very kind." Marcus's gaze lingered on her for a moment too long before he nodded and stepped back. "Take care now." With that, he turned and walked away, leaving Sophie with a strange sense of unease she couldn't quite explain. Over the next few hours, Sophie found herself replaying the encounter in her mind. There was something familiar about Marcus, his voice, perhaps, or the way he carried himself, but she couldn't place it. As she tried to focus on piecing together more of her past, flashes of memory surfaced like ripples in still water. She remembered a sprawling estate surrounded by manicured gardens, a little girl playing on a swing set, herself, younger, pushing the child gently as laughter echoed in the air. And then Victor Kane's face looming above her, his expression unreadable. "I worked for them," she whispered aloud, startling Liam, who had been typing furiously on his laptop. "For who?" he asked sharply, leaning forward. "Victor Kane," Sophie replied, her voice trembling. "I think I was a nanny for his daughter." Liam's jaw tightened. This revelation added another layer of complexity to their situation. If Sophie had been part of Victor's inner circle, even peripherally, it meant she knew things that could get her killed. Later that evening, Marcus returned, this time bearing a plate of homemade cookies. Sophie answered the door, grateful for the distraction. They chatted briefly on the porch, Marcus asking casual questions about where they were from and why they'd chosen such a secluded spot. Each question felt harmless enough, but Sophie noticed how intently he listened to her answers, as if dissecting every word. As they talked, Marcus subtly dropped hints designed to confuse her further. "You know, I used to work security for some big names in town," he said casually. "One of them might have owned a place near here. Ever heard of Victor Kane?" Sophie froze, her heart skipping a beat. "Why would you mention him?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Oh, no reason," Marcus replied with a shrug. "Just thought maybe you recognized the name. Some people say he's not as clean-cut as he seems." The comment lingered in Sophie's mind long after Marcus left. That night, she dreamt of Victor's office again, the argument, the woman clutching the folder. Only this time, Marcus's face appeared in the shadows, watching silently. Meanwhile, Liam's suspicions grew. He observed Marcus's behavior closely, noting the calculated charm and the deliberate attempts to ingratiate himself with Sophie. When Marcus stopped by unexpectedly the following day, Liam finally confronted him. "What do you want?" Liam demanded, blocking the doorway. His tone was icy, his posture rigid. Marcus raised his hands in mock surrender. "Relax, man. Just checking in on your friend here. She seemed shaken up earlier." "She doesn't need your help," Liam snapped, stepping closer. "And neither do I." Before Marcus could respond, the sound of gunfire erupted outside, shattering the tense standoff. Bullets tore through the front window, sending shards of glass flying. Sophie screamed as Liam tackled her to the ground, shielding her with his body. Amidst the chaos, Marcus disappeared into the smoke-filled street, his expression unreadable. As Liam pulled Sophie toward the back exit, he glanced over his shoulder, his mind racing. Was Marcus involved, or was he simply collateral damage in Victor's relentless pursuit? The world outside dissolved into chaos as gunfire tore through the night. Bullets ricocheted off walls, shattering windows and sending splinters of wood flying. Sophie's ears rang from the deafening noise, her body trembling beneath Liam's weight as he shielded her with his own. The acrid smell of gunpowder filled the air, mingling with the metallic tang of fear. "Stay down!" Liam barked, his voice firm despite the pandemonium. He grabbed Sophie by the arm, pulling her toward the back door. Every movement felt like slow motion, each step a gamble against unseen threats lurking in the shadows. Behind them, flames licked hungrily at the curtains, devouring what little safety they'd found in the duplex. Smoke billowed upward, choking the room with thick gray clouds that stung their eyes and burned their lungs. Sophie stumbled over debris, coughing violently as she struggled to keep up. Liam didn't let go of her hand, not for a second. His grip was unyielding, grounding her even as panic threatened to consume her. For the first time since they'd met, Sophie allowed herself to lean on him completely, trusting that he wouldn't let her fall. They burst through the back exit, gasping for fresh air as they stumbled into an alleyway bathed in flickering streetlights. Shadows danced along the walls, distorted by the distant echoes of sirens wailing in response to the attack. Liam scanned their surroundings, his sharp gaze darting between parked cars and dumpsters, searching for any sign of pursuit. "We can't stay here," he muttered under his breath, tugging Sophie forward. "They'll be looking for us." Sophie nodded numbly, her legs moving on autopilot. Her mind raced with questions she couldn't answer. Who were these men? How had they found them so quickly? And why did Marcus disappear without a word? Her thoughts spiraled inward, tangled with doubt. She remembered his friendly smile, his casual comments about Victor Kane. Had it all been an act? Was he feeding her lies to throw her off balance, or worse, setting her up? They ducked into another abandoned building, its interior dark and damp. The faint drip of water echoed through empty halls, amplifying the tension between them. Sophie sank onto a dusty crate, her hands gripping the edges tightly as if trying to steady herself. Liam stood nearby, his arms crossed, his expression unreadable. For a moment, silence reigned, a fragile ceasefire before the storm broke. "What aren't you telling me?" Sophie finally asked, her voice barely above a whisper, but laced with accusation. Liam hesitated, his jaw tightening. "I don't know what you mean." "Yes, you do." Sophie's tone hardened, anger bubbling beneath the surface. "You think I'm hiding something." That maybe I'm not who I say I am. Liam turned to face her, his gray eyes piercing. Are you? The question hit like a punch to the gut, leaving Sophie breathless. She wanted to scream, to deny it, but how could she when she didn't even know the truth herself? Instead, she looked away, tears welling in her eyes. I'm doing everything I can to protect you, Liam continued, his voice softer now. But I need answers, Sophie. If there's something you're not telling me. There isn't, she snapped, standing abruptly. Don't you get it? I don't remember. All I have are fragments, pieces of a puzzle I can't put together. Her frustration spilled over, raw and unfiltered. And then there's you, she added bitterly, acting like I'm some kind of liability, like I'm not worth saving unless I prove myself. That's not fair, Liam shot back, stepping closer. You have no idea what's at stake here. People are dying because of whatever secrets you've forgotten. And until we figure out what they are, we're both targets. Sophie flinched at the truth in his words, but it only deepened her sense of isolation. Trust was supposed to be mutual, wasn't it? Yet, here they were, circling each other like wary animals, neither willing to take the first step. As tempers cooled, Sophie retreated into herself, replaying every interaction with Marcus, his casual mention of Victor Kane, the way he seemed to know just enough to confuse her further. It gnawed at her, planting seeds of doubt that took root deep within her psyche. She glanced at Liam, who was pacing again, muttering under his breath about their next move. Did he trust her? Or was he simply waiting for the right moment to cut ties? Before she could dwell on it further, Liam's phone buzzed loudly, breaking the tense quiet. He pulled it from his pocket, his brow furrowing as he read the message. Sophie watched as his expression darkened, the muscles in his jaw twitching. What is it? She asked cautiously. Liam hesitated, debating whether to share the information. Finally, he sighed and showed her the screen. The message was brief but chilling. She knows too much. Eliminate her. Sophie stared at the words, her heart pounding in her chest. Who sent this? She whispered, her voice trembling. When Liam didn't answer immediately, her worst fears surfaced. Did he believe the message? Or worse, did he agree with it? The abandoned building was silent except for the rhythmic drip of water echoing through its hollow halls. Sophie sat hunched on a dusty crate, her arms wrapped tightly around herself as if trying to hold back the tide of memories threatening to overwhelm her. The anonymous message still burned in her mind like a brand. She knows too much. Eliminate her. Liam paced nearby, his phone clutched in one hand while he muttered under his breath. His sharp features were etched with frustration and worry, the weight of their predicament pressing down on him. He glanced at Sophie occasionally, torn between protecting her and questioning whether she truly deserved his trust. Who else knows about us? Sophie finally asked, breaking the tense silence. Her voice was quiet but laced with unease. If someone sent that message, they must have been watching us. They're always watching, Liam replied grimly, stopping mid-step. His gray eyes locked onto hers, searching for something, answers, honesty, anything to ease the growing suspicion gnawing at him. Which is why we need to figure out exactly what you've forgotten. Fast. Sophie flinched at the edge in his tone, but didn't argue. She couldn't blame him for doubting her, not when even she doubted herself. Still, his words stung, reminding her how fragile their alliance really was. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Time blurred in the dim light of the building. Liam worked tirelessly on his laptop, digging deeper into Sophie's past. Each keystroke felt like a hammer striking an anvil, chipping away at the wall of mystery surrounding her. And then a hit. Liam froze, his fingers hovering above the keyboard as a name popped up on the screen. Sophie Lane. But this wasn't just any record. It was a whistleblower profile buried deep within activist forums. According to the posts, Sophie had been leaking confidential documents exposing unethical practices within Kane Pharmaceuticals. Internal memos detailing illegal experiments, falsified data, bribes, it was all there, meticulously documented. His pulse quickened as he scrolled through the files. This wasn't just coincidence or bad luck. Sophie hadn't stumbled into danger by accident. She'd walked straight into the lion's den, and now the lion wanted revenge. He turned to share the discovery with her, only to find her standing near the cracked window, staring out at the desolate street below. Her face was pale, her green eyes distant, as though she were seeing something far beyond the present moment. "You were helping them," Liam said softly, his voice cutting through the silence like a blade. Sophie, startled, turning to face him. "What?" "The activists," he clarified, holding up his laptop. "You were feeding them information, exposing Victor's crimes." Her breath hitched, panic flashing across her face. "No, I wouldn't have done that. I'm not brave enough to." "Yes, you are," Liam interrupted firmly. "Look at this. It's undeniable." Sophie hesitated before taking the laptop from him. As she scanned the documents, fragments of memory began surfacing. Late nights spent copying files, sneaking encrypted drives out of secure facilities, meeting shadowy figures in parking lots. She remembered the fear, the adrenaline, the sense of purpose driving her forward. But she also remembered the guilt. The voices whispering warnings she chose to ignore, until it was too late. "I didn't know," Sophie whispered, her voice trembling. "I thought I was just exposing corruption. I never imagined people would die because of me." Liam stepped closer, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "You didn't cause this, Sophie. Victor did. He's the one who decided murder was easier than accountability." For a moment, their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them, a flicker of understanding, of shared resolve. Despite everything, Liam believed in her innocence. And Sophie, for the first time since waking up disoriented near that crime scene, felt like she might actually survive this nightmare. Their fragile peace was shattered hours later when Sophie insisted on stepping outside for fresh air. The claustrophobia of the abandoned building had become unbearable, and she needed space to think, to breathe. Reluctantly, Liam agreed, following her closely as she wandered down the deserted street. The city felt eerily quiet, as if holding its breath. Shadows stretched long across cracked pavement, hiding more than they revealed. As they rounded a corner, Sophie froze. Lying in a pool of blood against a crumbling brick wall was a man, his lifeless eyes staring blankly at the sky. In his hand he clutched a crumpled piece of paper bearing the same logo Sophie had seen in the leaked documents. Kane Pharmaceuticals. "Oh, God!" Sophie gasped, stumbling backward. Her legs gave out beneath her, and Liam caught her just in time. "He's dead," she choked out, tears streaming down her face. "They killed him, just like they'll kill me." Before Liam could respond, the sound of approaching footsteps echoed through the alley. They turned to see silhouettes emerging from the shadows. Men dressed in black, their faces obscured by masks. One of them held a gun pointed directly at them. "Run!" Liam shouted, pulling Sophie to her feet. Panic surged through her veins as they sprinted down the alley, dodging trash cans and leaping over debris. Behind them, bullets ricocheted off walls, each shot a reminder of how close death loomed. Somehow, amidst the chaos, Sophie managed to break free from Liam's grasp. Whether it was instinct or desperation, she didn't stop to think, she just ran. Into the darkness, away from the gunfire, away from everything. As the echoes of pursuit faded into the distance, Liam skidded to a halt, scanning the shadows for any sign of Sophie. But she was gone, vanished without a trace. Breathing heavily, he clenched his fists, guilt and fear warring within him. Had she been captured? Or worse, had she betrayed him after all? Before he could decide what to do next, his phone buzzed violently in his pocket. Another message flashed across the screen. "Find her before we do." The city streets were eerily silent as Liam stood frozen, his phone clutched tightly in one hand. The message burned into his mind. Find her before we do. His chest heaved with exertion from the chase, but it was the weight of guilt that made it hard to breathe. Sophie was gone. Again. He clenched his jaw, forcing himself to focus. Panic wouldn't help her now. Instead, he retraced their steps, searching for anything Sophie might have left behind. A dropped item, a scuff mark on the pavement, anything. Each passing second felt like an eternity, stretching the distance between them further. Finally, near the corner where they'd last seen the body of the whistleblower, Liam spotted something glinting faintly under the dim streetlight. It was a small silver chain, an anklet Sophie had been wearing earlier. He picked it up, his fingers trembling slightly as he examined it. This wasn't just carelessness. It was evidence she'd struggled here. Dragged away, perhaps. Liam's stomach churned at the thought. Kidnapped or betrayed. Either way, time was running out. Meanwhile, Sophie woke groggily in an abandoned warehouse, her head pounding like a drum. Cold concrete pressed against her cheek, and the metallic tang of blood lingered on her tongue. Her wrists were bound tightly with duct tape, cutting into her skin every time she shifted. Panic surged through her veins as her surroundings came into focus. Dusty machinery, broken windows letting in slivers of moonlight, and Marcus Hale standing over her with a smug grin. Well, Marcus said, crouching down to eye level. Look who decided to wake up. Sophie recoiled instinctively, trying to scramble backward despite the restraints. What do you want? She demanded, her voice hoarse but laced with defiance. Marcus chuckled, leaning closer. Oh, nothing much. Just answers. And maybe a little cooperation. Her heart raced as fragments of memory surfaced. His casual comments about Victor Kane, the misleading information he'd fed her. It all clicked into place now. He hadn't been a neighbor. He'd been sent to watch her, to manipulate her. You're working for him, Sophie spat, glaring at him. For Victor. Marcus tilted his head, feigning mock surprise. Guilty as charged. But don't worry, you still have value. For now. His words sent a chill down her spine, but Sophie refused to let fear consume her. She forced herself to think, to remember what Liam would do if he were here. Fight back. Stay strong. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Time blurred in the oppressive darkness of the warehouse. Marcus paced around her, occasionally tossing questions designed to unravel her already fragile psyche. Why did you betray us, Sophie? He asked casually, circling her like prey. All those secrets you leaked. Did you really think you could get away with it? I didn't know. Sophie snapped, her voice rising despite herself. I was just trying to do the right thing. The right thing, Marcus echoed mockingly. Funny how doing the right thing gets people killed. His words struck a nerve, dredging up memories of the bodies she'd seen. The whistleblowers silenced by Victor's henchmen. Guilt threatened to overwhelm her again, but this time she fought it. These men weren't victims, they were monsters, and she wouldn't let them win. Summoning every ounce of courage, Sophie lunged forward, catching Marcus off guard. Using her bound hands, she swung wildly, striking him across the face. He stumbled back, cursing loudly as she scrambled to her feet. That's not going to save you, Marcus growled, recovering quickly and grabbing her arm. His grip was like iron, twisting painfully until she cried out. But Sophie didn't stop fighting. She kicked, thrashed, and clawed at him, refusing to give in. For the first time since waking up disoriented near that crime scene, she felt a flicker of control, of strength. Back in the city, Liam followed a trail of clues leading him to an industrial district littered with derelict buildings. His instincts screamed danger, but he couldn't afford to hesitate, not when Sophie's life hung in the balance. Every shadow seemed darker, every sound louder, as he moved cautiously through the maze of warehouses. Then he heard it, a muffled scream echoing through the night. Without hesitation, he sprinted toward the source, his heart hammering in his chest. Inside the warehouse, Marcus finally subdued Sophie, shoving her roughly against a wall. Blood trickled from a cut on her forehead, but her green eyes blazed with determination. She wasn't giving up, not yet. Before Marcus could say another word, the door burst open, and Victor Kane strode in, his presence commanding even in the dim light. His cold eyes locked onto Sophie, and a sinister smile spread across his face. "There you are," Victor said smoothly, his voice dripping with menace. "I've been looking for you, Sophie. You see, I know exactly who you are and why you must die." Sophie froze, her breath catching in her throat. Betrayal radiated from his gaze, promising no mercy. As Victor advanced toward her, Sophie realized there was no escape this time. Unless help arrived soon, she would become another nameless victim buried beneath Victor's empire. The warehouse was a labyrinth of shadows and echoes, the air thick with dust and the metallic tang of fear. Sophie stood frozen, her back pressed against the cold concrete wall as Victor Kane advanced toward her. His polished shoes clicked ominously against the floor, each step a countdown to something she wasn't sure she could survive. "You've been quite the thorn in my side," Victor said, his voice smooth but laced with venom. "All those secrets you leaked, did you really think you'd get away with it?" Sophie's heart pounded in her chest, her mind racing for an escape that seemed impossible. Marcus lingered nearby, his arms crossed, watching her with a smirk that made her skin crawl. She wanted to scream, to fight back, but what good would it do? Against men like these, she was outnumbered, outmatched. Then, without warning, chaos erupted. A deafening crash shattered the silence as Liam barreled through the door, wielding nothing more than sheer determination and a heavy piece of rebar he'd picked up along the way. He moved like a man possessed, swinging wildly at Marcus, who barely had time to react before being struck across the jaw. The blow sent him sprawling, cursing loudly as blood trickled from his lip. "Liam!" Sophie gasped, relief flooding her voice even as terror still gripped her. "Stay behind me!" Liam barked, positioning himself between her and Victor. His gray eyes burned with fury, his entire body taut with readiness to strike again if necessary. Victor raised a hand, signaling his remaining henchmen to hold their ground. For now, he seemed content to observe, his expression unreadable but undeniably dangerous. "How predictable," he sneered. "The knight in shining armor comes to save the damsel." "I'm not here to play games," Liam growled, tightening his grip on the rebar. "Let her go, or I swear." "Or what?" Victor interrupted, taking a deliberate step forward. "You'll expose me? Oh, please. You have no idea how deep this goes." His words hung in the air, heavy with implication. Sophie felt her stomach churn, memories bubbling to the surface like oil rising from murky depths. Fragments of conversations, long forgotten, began to align, forming a horrifying picture. She remembered now, the office, the argument, the folder clutched tightly in the woman's hands. And Victor's voice, cold and calculating, cutting through the tension like a blade. "Take care of them. All of them." It hit her like a punch to the gut. Those weren't idle threats. They were orders. Orders to silence anyone who dared challenge his empire, including the whistleblowers whose bodies she'd seen. Including her. "Oh my God!" Sophie whispered, her voice trembling. "You ordered it. All of it." Victor's smile faltered for just a moment, replaced by a flicker of irritation. "Very astute," he admitted, almost begrudgingly. "But knowing won't save you." Before either of them could respond, one of the henchmen lunged at Liam, attempting to overpower him. The two men grappled fiercely, exchanging blows as Sophie scrambled to free herself from her restraints. Her fingers fumbled over the duct tape, binding her wrists, until finally, with a painful yank, she tore it loose. Adrenaline surged through her veins as she grabbed a rusted pipe lying nearby. With a primal scream, she swung it at the nearest attacker, catching him squarely in the temple. He crumpled to the ground, unconscious, leaving Liam free to focus on the others. "Sophie, move!" Liam shouted, tossing her a pocket knife he'd pulled from his belt. She caught it midair, using it to cut through the last remnants of tape around her ankles. As the melee unfolded, Sophie's mind continued piecing together the puzzle of her past. She recalled late nights spent poring over documents, planting evidence where it would be found by activists determined to bring Victor down. At the time, she hadn't fully understood the stakes, how far he would go to protect his secrets. But now, standing amidst the wreckage of her own choices, she realized the truth. She hadn't just exposed corruption, she'd ignited a war, and people had died because of her. Her guilt collided with a newfound sense of resolve. She wouldn't let Victor win, not after everything he'd taken from her, not after everyone he'd killed. When the dust settled, only Victor remained standing. His henchmen lay scattered across the warehouse floor, groaning or unconscious. Liam stood panting, his knuckles bloody, but his gaze unwavering as he faced off against the man who had orchestrated so much pain. "It's over," Liam declared, his voice steady despite the exhaustion etched into every line of his face. "We know everything." Victor chuckled darkly, shaking his head. "Do you really think it's that simple? Even if you manage to walk out of here alive, there will always be someone else. Someone stronger, smarter, better prepared." He reached into his pocket, pulling out a sleek phone. With a few quick taps, he sent a message, his lips curling into a sinister grin. "Enjoy your freedom while it lasts," he said mockingly, "because you won't make it to trial alive." As they fled the warehouse, the distant sound of sirens echoed through the night. But instead of relief, Sophie felt a creeping dread settle in her chest. Victor's parting words replayed in her mind, colder than ever. "You won't make it to trial alive." They weren't safe yet, not even close. The days leading up to the trial passed in a blur of preparation and paranoia. Sophie sat hunched over stacks of documents spread across a makeshift table in their latest safe house, a cramped apartment tucked above a bustling cafe. Her green eyes darted between pages, her hands trembling as she pieced together the evidence that would bring Victor Kane to justice. Each line felt like a lifeline, connecting her fractured past to the present moment. Liam stood by the window, his arms crossed tightly over his chest as he scanned the street below. Shadows moved among the crowd outside, ordinary pedestrians or hired killers. It was impossible to tell anymore. The weight of Victor's threat hung heavy in the air. "You won't make it to trial alive." "You're doing great," Liam said softly, turning toward Sophie. His voice was steady, but the tension etched into his features betrayed his unease. "We just need to hold on a little longer." Sophie glanced up at him, her lips pressed into a thin line. She wanted to believe him, to trust that they could outlast this nightmare, but doubt gnawed at her resolve. Every creak of the floorboards, every distant siren, felt like a countdown to disaster. "I don't know if I can do this," she admitted quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. Facing him again in court, what if I freeze? What if I forget everything? Liam knelt beside her, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "You've already come so far," he said firmly. "Victor doesn't scare you anymore, not like he used to. You're stronger than you think." His words carried a quiet certainty that made her heart ache with gratitude. For weeks, she doubted herself, questioned her worth. But now, looking into Liam's gray eyes, she saw something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. Hope. As the hours ticked by, Sophie's memories continued surfacing, filling in gaps she hadn't realized were missing. She recalled late nights spent sneaking encrypted files out of Kane Pharmaceutical secure servers, the adrenaline rush of meeting shadowy activists in dimly lit parking lots, the guilt of knowing lives would be lost because of what she'd exposed, but also the conviction that silence was no longer an option. With each memory came clarity and courage. By the time evening fell, Sophie had transformed. The fear still lingered, but it no longer controlled her. Instead, it fueled her determination to see this through, to ensure Victor paid for his crimes. "We're ready," she declared, straightening her posture as she gathered the documents into a neat pile. "If we can get to the courthouse tomorrow, we'll have enough to put him away for good." Liam nodded, though his expression remained grim. "Let's hope we live long enough to see it happen." Night descended quickly, cloaking the city in darkness. Outside, rain drizzled steadily, creating rivers of water along the cracked sidewalks. Inside the safe house, the atmosphere grew heavier with each passing minute. Neither Sophie nor Liam dared sleep. Instead, they took turns keeping watch, their nerves stretched taut like piano strings. Around midnight, the sound of footsteps echoed through the hallway outside their door. Slow, deliberate steps that stopped just short of their threshold. Sophie froze, her breath catching in her throat as she exchanged a panicked glance with Liam. "They found us," she whispered, clutching the edge of the table for support. Liam grabbed the nearest weapon, a heavy flashlight, and crept toward the door. He motioned for Sophie to stay back, but she refused, positioning herself behind him with a kitchen knife clutched tightly in her hand. Together, they waited, hearts pounding in unison. The first blow came without warning, a deafening crash as the door splintered inward, sending shards of wood flying. Masked men poured into the room, weapons raised and faces obscured. Gunfire erupted, bullets tearing through walls and furniture as chaos consumed the space. "Get down!" Liam shouted, tackling Sophie to the ground just as a bullet whizzed past where her head had been moments before. Glass shattered overhead, raining shards onto the floor as they scrambled for cover. Sophie crawled beneath a toppled bookshelf, her mind racing. This couldn't be how it ended. Not after everything they'd fought for. Summoning every ounce of strength, she lunged forward, driving the knife into one attacker's leg. He cried out in pain, dropping his weapon as Liam seized the opportunity to disarm him. But there were too many. One man tackled Liam to the ground, pinning him down while another advanced on Sophie. She kicked wildly, desperation lending her speed and precision. Her foot connected with the side of his knee, sending him stumbling backward. "Sophie, run!" Liam yelled, struggling against his captor. She hesitated, torn between fighting and fleeing. Then, seizing a shard of broken glass from the floor, she slashed at the man closest to her, buying herself enough time to grab Liam's arm and pull him to his feet. They burst through the apartment door, stumbling into the rain-soaked hallway. Blood trickled from cuts on their faces and arms, mixing with the rainwater pooling on the floor. Behind them, shouts echoed as the attackers regrouped, giving chase. "This way!" Liam shouted, pulling Sophie toward the fire escape at the end of the hall. They climbed down frantically, slipping on wet metal rungs as gunfire ricocheted around them. When they finally reached the alley below, both collapsed against the brick wall, gasping for air. Their bodies ached, their clothes soaked through, but neither dared rest for more than a second. "We can't keep running like this," Sophie panted, her voice raw with exhaustion. "He'll never stop coming for us." Liam nodded grimly, his gaze fixed on the shadows ahead. "Then we finish this tomorrow, no matter what it takes." As they limped away from the wreckage of their safe house, another message flashed on Liam's phone. "Last chance to walk away. Testify and you die." Victor wasn't bluffing, and now, injured and desperate, they had less than 12 hours to prepare for the fight of their lives. The courtroom was a cavernous space, its high ceilings and polished wood panels exuding an air of solemnity that seemed almost surreal given the storm brewing outside and within. Reporters filled the benches, cameras flashing like strobe lights as Sophie and Liam entered through a side door flanked by security guards. The atmosphere crackled with anticipation, every eye in the room fixed on them. Sophie's hands trembled as she clutched the folder containing the evidence they'd risked everything to gather. She glanced at Liam, who gave her a small nod of encouragement. His presence steadied her nerves, but the weight of what lay ahead pressed down on her chest like a stone. Victor Kane sat stoically at the defense table, his tailored suit immaculate, his expression unreadable. To anyone else, he might have appeared calm, confident even, but Sophie knew better. Beneath that polished exterior lurked a predator cornered, desperate to protect his empire no matter the cost. When called to the stand, Sophie walked slowly, each step feeling heavier than the last. As she raised her right hand to swear an oath, her gaze flickered toward Victor. For a brief moment, their eyes met, and she saw it, the flicker of hatred masked by indifference. It sent a shiver down her spine, but she forced herself to focus. "Ms. Lane," the prosecutor began gently, "can you tell us what you witnessed during your time at Kane Pharmaceuticals?" Sophie took a deep breath, her voice steady despite the fear clawing at her insides. "I worked as a nanny for Victor Kane's family," she began, her words carrying a quiet strength. "But I also discovered documents detailing illegal experiments, falsified data, bribes, and orders to silence whistleblowers." She recounted the memories that had surfaced over the past weeks, the late nights spent copying files, the meetings with activists, the realization that exposing these crimes would put her life in danger. Her testimony painted a damning picture of Victor's empire, one built on corruption and bloodshed. As she spoke, other witnesses came forward, emboldened by her courage. Former employees, whistleblowers, even victims of Kane Pharmaceuticals' unethical practices, all added their voices to the growing chorus of accusations against Victor. The courtroom buzzed with tension, reporters scribbling furiously as the case against him mounted. But just as Sophie prepared to deliver the final piece of evidence, the encrypted USB drive, a deafening crash shattered the fragile calm. Doors burst open, and masked men stormed into the courtroom, weapons drawn. Panic erupted instantly, screams filling the air as people scrambled for cover. Lawyers ducked beneath tables. Jurors fled their seats, and chaos reigned supreme. "Sophie!" Liam shouted, grabbing her arm and pulling her behind the witness stand. Bullets ricocheted off walls, shattering windows, and sending shards of glass raining down like hail. Through the mayhem, Sophie caught sight of Victor slipping out a side exit, his henchmen creating a diversion to ensure his escape. Fury surged through her veins, burning away the fear. This wasn't just about survival anymore, it was about justice. "We need to stop him!" she yelled over the din, clutching the USB drive tightly in her fist. "No way!" Liam shot back, shielding her body with his own as bullets whizzed past. "You're not going anywhere near him." But Sophie refused to back down. Summoning every ounce of determination, she pushed past him, darting toward the exit Victor had used. Liam cursed under his breath and followed, unwilling to let her face this alone. The hallway beyond the courtroom was eerily silent compared to the chaos inside. Sophie moved cautiously, her heart pounding as she searched for any sign of Victor. Then, rounding a corner, she found him, standing beside an elevator, his phone pressed to his ear. "You won't get away with this," Sophie said, her voice trembling but resolute. Victor turned slowly, his cold smile sending a chill down her spine. "Oh, my dear Sophie," he replied smoothly, "it's already done." Before she could react, Liam appeared behind her, tackling Victor to the ground. The two men grappled fiercely, exchanging blows as Sophie watched, frozen momentarily by indecision. Then, seizing the opportunity, she lunged forward, driving her knee into the side of one of Victor's henchmen who had arrived to assist. With Victor subdued and his accomplices incapacitated, law enforcement finally breached the scene, flooding the hallway with officers armed and ready. Handcuffs clicked around Victor's wrists as he was dragged to his feet, his smug demeanor replaced by barely concealed rage. "It's over," Liam declared, pulling Sophie close as relief washed over them both. As Victor was led away in handcuffs, Sophie felt a strange unease settle in her chest. He turned his head, slightly, locking eyes with her one final time. His lips curled into a sinister grin, and though no words were spoken, his message was clear. This isn't over. The courthouse steps were bathed in the golden light of a setting sun, casting long shadows across the crowd gathered below. Reporters shouted questions, their cameras flashing like fireworks as Victor Kane was led into a waiting police van. Handcuffed and flanked by officers, his once imposing presence now seemed diminished, a relic of an empire that had crumbled under the weight of its own corruption. Sophie stood at the top of the stairs, her arms wrapped tightly around herself as she watched the scene unfold. The USB drive, the same one she'd clutched so desperately weeks ago, was safely tucked away in evidence, a silent witness to the truth it had revealed. For the first time in what felt like forever, she allowed herself to breathe deeply, the oppressive weight of fear lifting from her shoulders. Liam stood beside her, his posture relaxed but vigilant, scanning the crowd for any lingering threats. Though Victor was behind bars and his henchmen, including Marcus, had been arrested, neither of them could shake the feeling that danger still lingered somewhere just out of sight. But today wasn't about fear, it was about triumph, about survival. "You did it," Liam said softly, turning to face Sophie. His gray eyes softened, reflecting pride and something deeper, something unspoken. "We did it," Sophie corrected, meeting his gaze with a small smile. Her voice wavered slightly, but there was no mistaking the strength behind it. "I couldn't have done this without you." For a moment, they simply looked at each other, the world fading into background noise. In that shared glance, everything unsaid between them came rushing to the surface. The trust forged through fire, the sacrifices made, the lives forever changed. It wasn't just gratitude or admiration. It was love born from shared trauma and mutual respect. Later that evening, they found themselves walking along the riverfront, the city skyline glowing faintly in the distance. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of rain yet to fall. Sophie stopped near a bench overlooking the water, her green eyes distant as she reflected on everything they'd endured. "I've been thinking," she began hesitantly, glancing at Liam, "about what comes next." He raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "And I want to keep fighting," she said firmly, her voice gaining confidence with each word. "Victor may be gone, but people like him still exist. People who think they're untouchable. I can't go back to living in ignorance. Not after everything I've seen." Liam nodded slowly, understanding dawning in his expression. "Activism," he murmured, almost to himself. Then, more clearly, "You'd make a damn good one." Sophie laughed softly, shaking her head. "Maybe. But I wouldn't be here if it weren't for you. Watching how far you were willing to go, it inspired me, made me realize I could do more than just survive. I could fight back." Her words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. She reached out, taking his hand in hers, their fingers intertwined naturally, as though they'd always belonged together. "And what about us?" she asked quietly, her tone tinged with vulnerability. "Where do we go from here?" Liam squeezed her hand gently, his lips curving into a rare smile. "Together," he replied simply. "Whatever comes next, we face it side by side." As they sat on the bench, watching the river ripple under the moonlight, Sophie leaned her head against Liam's shoulder. For the first time since waking up disoriented near that crime scene, she felt whole. Not because the scars had healed, they hadn't, but because she'd learned to carry them differently, to let them shape her without defining her. In the distance, the city buzzed with life, oblivious to the battles fought and won within its borders. But Sophie and Liam knew better. They carried the weight of those battles and the promise of brighter days ahead. Standing outside the courthouse the following morning, Sophie adjusted the strap of her bag, her posture radiating quiet determination. Beside her, Liam slipped his hand into hers, their connection solidified by everything they'd overcome. Together, they descended the steps, ready to take on whatever challenges lay ahead. As they reached the bottom, Sophie paused, looking back at the courthouse one last time. The sun broke through the clouds, bathing the building in warm light. It was over for now, but she knew their fight wasn't finished. Not truly. Ready? Liam asked, his voice steady. Sophie nodded, squeezing his hand. Let's go. Hand in hand, they stepped forward into the unknown, united by love, resilience, and hope.